So Blender is my new favorite 3D software, and in this video I will be showing you how you can motion track your footage right inside of Blender itself. And also I will be sharing a bonus tip how we can work with a track that is not, as perfect as we'd like to. Okay, so let's jump into Blender, and up here in your layouts we can actually choose the VFX motion tracking layout. So now we get our workspace set up here correctly, and now we can go in here and select our footage that we want to track. So I'm just gonna go in here and select one of these. Let's go with the old lady here. So the next thing I'm gonna do is go in here under output and make sure that my frame rate is the same as the clip. So I shot this clip in 25 frames per second, so that's why I'm going in here and change my frame rate to 25. So now I want to make the Blender timeline the same length as the clip, and you can do that very easily just by pressing this button here, Set Scene Frames. And you can see here in Blender that the timeline expanded. We have about 650 frames here in the timeline. I'm also going to press prefetch because that will save the clip into memory so that it will go a little bit smoother when you're playing back and tracking back and forward. Here at the beginning, at frame 0, we want to add markers that is going to track the footage. So I'm going to press Detect Features. So that will populate the entire frame with these markers. And here's a crucial point that really helped me with getting better tracks, and that is to go in here and open up this little menu and play around with these settings to get as many markers as possible in your footage. Margin deals with the border. If I set like 50 here, you can see that a couple of markers disappeared from the edge. So you might want to have some kind of margin here so that your track doesn't go flying off when it reaches the border and have nothing to track. Then here under threshold, if we lowered this, you can see that we get more markers. And then the last setting is the distance, which means how far away the trackers are to each other. So I'm going to lower this value, and you can see that we really are getting quite a lot of markers in our frame here. So I'm going to go with something like this, and then I'm going to remove our menu. This is great, but there's one thing we need to do before we track, and that is our lady here. She will be moving around. I don't want any markers on her. So we can do a lasso selection by pressing Control Option on a Mac. And with the right mouse button, we can do this selection here around our lady, and then press X and D. So now we don't have any markers on our lady here that will be moving. If we had, it would probably throw off our track quite a lot. So now we are ready to track. So I'm going down here with this button. I'm going to track forward in this sequence. And if it doesn't work, it's because I haven't selected the markers, which you do by pressing A. So now I've selected all the markers, and then I can track. So after we tracked, you can see here in our timeline that we have a lot of spikes. And these spikes are bad for your solve. So you really want to remove these spikes. So what you could do is to go in here and press XD and delete all of these spikes. But I'm actually going to leave them now because there is another way that we can clean up all of these bad tracks. But before we're going to clean up our track, we are actually going to the last frame here and do the opposite track. I mean, make markers here and track backwards. So I'm going to the last frame. I'm going to press Detect Features. And then once again, we need to remove those markers that are covering our lady here. I'm going to do our lasso selection and XD, remove those. So now we can select all of our markers with A and then press this button here so that we track backwards. Okay, I think we are ready to move along. So I'm going to go to the page called Solve here. I'm actually going to solve the camera right now before I clean up. I do that by selecting these keyframes here. These keyframe A and B, you're supposed to put these between where the camera moves the most. So basically, maybe over here, I start moving the camera on the dolly, and that is like frame 100, and we go over to perhaps, let's say 450. So I'm gonna put in 100 and 450 here. And now I'm going to press Solve Camera. So now Blender is trying to solve the track with the markers that we have in our frame here. And you can see here in Solve Error, we're supposed to get as low as possible here on the Solve Error. It's a hard word to say, error, error. So now Blender solved the camera, and it reports here that we have a 1.47 pixel solve error. And the idea here is to get this value as low as possible, as close to 0 as possible. And it will be acceptable if you have it under 1, and it will be perfect if you have it around 0.3. So now we can start, getting this number as low as possible by doing the cleanup. So first I'm going to press Clean Track here, and we get this little menu. So now we can select the reprojection error. So if we start with this setting quite high, you can see that we have only one selected, and then if we go down, you can select these markers that are not good. So I'm going to maybe go down a bit here to 5, maybe 4.8, something like that. Then I will press XD for delete. And as you can see, that cleaned up our track here in the timeline quite a lot. We removed a lot of spikes, and that's good. And then we can go to filter tracks. And here we have another value that we can play around with. So 5, we have selected a couple of markers, and let's try to remove those. And look at that, a couple of spikes removed. And then we can go up and solve the camera again and see what that did to our solve error. And as you can see, we're down, just like that, down to 0.56 pixels, which is pretty good. Well, let's try to get this even lower. So I'm going to filter tracks again, and I am going to try maybe 4. Now we have a couple of markers here. I'm gonna delete those, and then solve the camera again. 54, we have now 0.54, so we're getting even better. Let's try it again. Let's make it maybe 2.8. So I remove those and then go and solve the camera again. 54, we're still at 54, okay, so that didn't do a lot. So I'm going to try the other menu here, Clean Tracks, and then maybe select a bunch of these markers here, and then go and delete those. And then solve the camera again. Okay, 42, so we are getting closer here. I'm going to try filter tracks again, and then maybe do 2.2 and remove those, and solve camera. All right, let's do the last one. 1.8, 1.8. Ooh, 39, oh my God, we're getting a good track here. I think we are ready to move on. You can actually see the camera track here. It's the blue line here in the timeline. And if you want to see it without your other tracks, you can press this button here that will hide your marker tracks. So now you can see the actual camera track that Blender solved. And this looks very, smooth, and there are no spikes. So I think we're ready to move on to the next phase in our motion track. So to get a camera from our motion track into our actual scene here, we're going to press Setup Tracking Scene. As you can see here in our viewport, we got a bunch of markers and also a camera that is moving according to our motion track. So normally you want to orient your camera by choosing a couple of markers here in the frame, and then either set those markers as a floor or a wall or origin or axis here. So I'm going to try and do this because I know that this is a wall, of course. So I'm going to select a couple of these and select the wall. As you can see, it's a little bit wonky here. I'm going to undo that. And I'm actually going to manually place my camera where I want it. So after we track the camera here, you might think that it's forbidden to move the camera after you tracked it, but that is not the case. You can see here that I can move around my camera and we still get the track working perfectly wherever you move it. You can even rotate it. So I'm going to do a little manual placement here of the camera. I know, for example, that we shot this perfectly leveled. So I'm going to level out my camera like this and then just place it here under the origin of my scene, like this. Okay, maybe bring it up here a bit and move this around. Yep, that looks perfectly. We have a track that is smooth. There are no jerkiness. It's works perfectly fine here. However, there is one issue with my track here, and that is you can see that the camera is actually moving up here just a little bit. Even though we shot this sequence with a dolly track, which was perfectly flat, perfectly horizontal. So even though we have a perfect track, Blender might imagining things. So what can we do to adjust this? First, I'm going into constraints here because I wanted to convert our motion track to actual keyframes that we can work with. You can do that by pressing this button called Constraints to F-Curve. So if we press that, you can see here on the timeline that we get a bunch of keyframes that we can work with. And the next thing I'm going to do is to add an empty object like this. First, I want to move the empty to my camera. So I'm pressing first the empty and then the camera and then Shift S and then selection to active. So now the empty moved to my camera's position. And now we can parent our camera to the empty, like this. This means that we can move the empty and then the camera will follow, like this. And still we have our track intact, as you can see. So wherever we move our empty, the camera will still work perfectly with the track. So to adjust this little upward motion that Blender solved, I'm going to rotate the empty just a little bit like this. And as you can see here, the camera is moving much more horizontally. I'm going to do it a little bit more, and that looks great. But there's a new problem here, and that is the camera is now pointing just a little bit downwards. And when we shot the clip, we were pointing our camera directly forward. So we are going to jump into animation here. And then, because we did our constraints to F-curve conversion, so we have keyframes here, we can just go in and select our graph editor and then choose, I believe it's the X here. So I select all of these keyframes and then I press G and Y so that I can move these keyframes only up and down because I don't want to move them sideways because that will mess up the entire track. So now I move my camera up like this. Here you can see that my camera is pointing straight forward, and also we can see that my camera is moving also on a perfect horizontal plane. So I jumped into my other project where I have our background ready to go here with our motion tracked footage. And as you can see, that our track worked perfectly here. So I hope this was helpful out there, and if you got any questions, let me know in the comment section. I will see you in the next one. Bye!